All right, so we're going to discuss the Renaissance in this video lecture. The Renaissance is going to occur over a period of time. It is not one event that just kind of begins. It's more so sporadic. It's ultimately changes within art and changes within science and kind of changes within societal thinking rather than some culminating ultimate change. So, as far as the background of the Renaissance is concerned, it is going to only occur in Western Europe. So this is not an event that is actually a global event. It's pretty centered in initially Italy, and then it will spread north. So as we look back at history, we know that Western Europe was impacted from the Crusades, and specifically that exchange with the Islamic community. So if we think back on what we've already learned, we know that Ibn Rushd had actually preserved Greco-Roman literature and philosophy, and so we know that that was already present. We also know that the Crusades allowed the Western Europeans to again kind of be reintroduced to thinking that they might have lost as they went into that Dark Ages or into that era of the Middle Ages. We also know that the plague is going to have a heavy impact, partly because individuals had succumbed to the plague, and with less people living, those that are living are actually going to be able to. I was trying to download the PowerPoint, sorry. Those that are living are going to be able to demand higher wages because with less workers, the need or the demand for the job is still there. And so they can kind of challenge their previous positions. So the Renaissance actually begins in Italy, and there's various reasons of why. Ultimately, there are various city-states that are prominent as far as trading is concerned, and this allows them to be successful. So Milan is one. Florence is the most specific one that you want to be familiar with, because these cities had, again, kind of seen the rise of trade and commerce. And this is going to allow them to kind of establish a basis of wealth. And then you're going to see that they kind of support the patronage of art and scientific development. You also see that merchants are going to dominate politics. And the most significant family is the Medici family, but the Sforza family is also going to be known to help to become patrons. And so the picture that's featured here is the Medici family. And so there's just various images. You've got Lorenzo, Cosimo, all of them, or Cosimo, have a ton of influence. And then it begins in Italy because of its location. It's amidst the ruins of these two great civilizations, Greece nearby, and then Rome, obviously, in Italy. So they can kind of think back on those classical works or classicism, kind of focusing on Greco-Roman history. So there's various ideas of the Renaissance that you want to be familiar with, and these are kind of some significant changes that occur that are going to impact how the Renaissance is this sporadic thinking in society. The first is humanism. And so instead of kind of thinking that the church is going to be the most significant playing factor in our lives, you start seeing that individuals kind of question that and they start focusing on what their potential is and what their individual achievements are. And again, pulling away from this idea of the church being the sole authority in society. And so this is where you all see the humanities develop in education. So history, literature, philosophy, various arts programs. Again, kind of looking at how individuals have shaped things, whether it's their writing or whether it's their experience in history. We also see a focus on secular thinking. So again, non-religious ideas, moving away from this idea that the church should dominate. And there's various factors that played into that. You've got the Crusades prior to this time where we start kind of questioning what the church had focused on and kind of initiated. You also have the plague because people had assumed that, or for many years thought the plague would infect those that were sinners. And so when there was no easy solution to this or remedy, it kind of begins, it gets people to kind of question the role of the church. You start seeing patrons of the arts. So again, these are people that are going to pay or encourage others to create art. The Medici family, which is that massive banking family, is going to have a huge role in this, which is why if you looked on the previous slide, they had all those pictures of their family painted. There's also an emphasis on writing in the vernacular. So moving away from this shift of everything being in Latin to things being written in the language that you speak. And so this is going to allow for increased literacy rates in society. So there's various changes in art, and again, you want to be familiar with these changes. There is a focus on realism, so actually having these realistic characteristics or qualities within the individual. So whether it's the hair or the attention to the detail on the face, all of these things are going to be very important in Renaissance art, and then moving forward until obviously we kind of see some changes in more contemporary works. There is this focus on the technique of perspective. So adding in that background to where things might have a little bit or be more dimensional. Again, major shift from what you had previously seen in the past with Middle Ages art. Your four major artists are the Ninja Turtles, basically. So Leonardo, Raphael, Michelangelo, and Donatello. Leonardo da Vinci is probably the more known, as well as Michelangelo. But they are going to create various works that are very, very important. So Da Vinci, obviously, here is the Mona Lisa. He also composes or creates the Last Supper. Raphael is focused on the Madonna and her child. Michelangelo has the infamous David, the painting of the Sistine Chapel, and Donatello also has his own version of David. So here we can see the Last Supper. So again, the realism, the different kind of facial features that you're going to see on the individuals, the perspective that the table seems to be in the front, and you've got things going on in the background. It is still religious in nature, so that is kind of one of the continuities of the time, is that while there is still a shift in things being more secular, there is also still this focus that the religious figures need to be prominent in the work. You've got this Sistine Chapel, part of this painted by Michelangelo, and this is actually going to be your Greco scholar, so you're going to have Socrates and Plato within this image. And so we're still seeing this shift as well into classicism. Literature is also going to make some various advancements. Petrarch is going to be a humanist. He is more known for having written various sonnets in a similar way that you might see with William Shakespeare. Boccaccio is going to write the Decameron, and this is a book, again, that kind of centers on the everyday life, so the humanist idea or perspective of the importance of the individual, and then it also is going to be heavily centered on the plague and its impacts on society. Niccolo Machiavelli's work, The Prince, is one of the most significant works that comes out during this time. It was written in 1517, and this is an image of Machiavelli. And it's basically a book that is going to talk about how an individual should rule an area. And the emphasis had actually been on the Medici family, kind of their personal background, and how a prince should govern an area to be effective. And so this is where he kind of argues that people are just naturally selfish and fickle and corrupt, so they're going to change their things. They may not always be loyal to a leader. And so the argument of whether it's better to be feared or loved in Machiavelli is that it's better to be feared, because if you're loved, people might take advantage of that. And so there are going to be things that a prince has to do that are politically effective, that may not be considered morally correct in society. But in order to maintain that position, those are the qualities that you have to have. So the Renaissance is going to move north again. It starts out in the Italian city-states, and then it's going to kind of move. And again, it's more so sporadic. It's not some sudden movement, and it's focused on those ideas of humanism and secular thinking and writing in the vernacular rather than, again, just a complete idea of this rebirth that kind of occurs. So the Northern humanists are going to be a little bit different. They are going to write a lot about how the church needs to reform. And they're going to face a lot of scrutiny from this. In some cases, you're actually going to see some executions occur because the church is not going to be as responsive at this point in history. It is going to come, but it's not ready yet. And so Erasmus is going to specifically write The Praise of Folly, where he really tries to emphasize reforms that need to occur within the church. You've got different artists. You've got Albrecht Dürer, you've got Jan van Eyck. Basically with the Northern art, it's just this emphasis of using oil-based paints. So again, you can see realism. You can see that those characteristics are also going to shift. You can see that we do have perspective, obviously, within this image and trying to enhance our art and the various aspects of that art that we're going to see. It's just the medium that they're using kind of changes as it moves north. So Northern Renaissance literature, this is the one that you're probably more familiar with. So this is probably what you are more familiar with. Erasmus, like I just said, was the praise of folly, and so he is going to argue that people should be able to study the Bible. At this point in time, the Bible was produced in Latin, which was not the common language anymore, and the sermons are obviously going to kind of be in Latin, and so we're starting to see various challenges here. And it wasn't even just that individuals in society couldn't read the Bible. What we start seeing is that even those church officials were illiterate. And again, this is going to be something that the Reformation is going to challenge. Thomas More is going to write his famous work, Utopia, which is about a utopian society. So in your literature classes, you're typically reading like dystopian novels, but Thomas More is trying to write about a true utopia where there is no war, there is no greed. And some of that stems from the events that had kind of unfolded in Europe during this time, whether it was this disastrous plague, whether it was these conquest of other groups moving into the region, whether it was this threat of Islam spreading, whether it was political corruption. And so we start seeing kind of these changes. And most notably for you all is going to be William Shakespeare. So he is obviously going to write his various plays, his sonnets, and all of these are going to make a big significant change as far as Western Europe is concerned. Shakespeare really does play on politics in his various works, whether it's Hamlet or Macbeth. He's talking about previous political issues and writing about those. So kind of interesting when you put them into perspective of what had happened in England at the time. So Shakespeare is writing during the Elizabethan age, which is under Queen Elizabeth's rule. And we'll talk about her a little bit more when we get into the Reformation. But she is going to be a huge patron. He is going to have several of his plays performed in the Globe Theatre, which is what is pictured here. And even though, again, he's kind of mocking some of the historical politics that had occurred in England, she is going to be a huge supporter of Shakespeare and actually attend several of his plays at the Globe Theatre. So the legacy of the Renaissance, you are going to see that realism in art that is going to be very, very significant, looking at their facial expressions, looking at kind of the surroundings in the artwork. The idea of secular work, so non-religious aspects, whether it is Thomas More's Utopia or some of Petrarch's sonnets or Shakespeare's sonnets, shifting away from this idea that the church should be the center of everything. Although you do still see that it is in the artwork. Writing in the vernacular, whether it's Dante's Inferno or Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, trying to make sure that people actually have access to reading. And to focus on praising individual achievements. So again, that idea of humanism and focusing on what the individual can contribute to society. Johann Gutenberg is going to create the printing press. Now, this is not something that is novel. The Chinese had invented the movable type, but you're going to see Gutenberg is actually going to create the printing press that further allows for the dissemination of material. Now we're writing in the language people can speak, so we are going to see this rise in literacy rates overall. And then he's going to directly impact the rise of the Reformation as well. And that last little bit is this overall idea of kind of questioning politics and questioning religion and whether or not these things should play the role that they do in society. What is an effective leader? What does it look like? What are their characteristics? Should the church be the center of the world? You know, if it's kind of been involved or associated with these negative things, is there corruption going on in the church? And so we're going to start seeing this shift that will kind of stem into the rise of the scientific revolution, but then also directly into the Protestant Reformation. And one of the big things to think about with the Renaissance as well is the idea of, is it a global movement or is it a regional movement? Because it is centered in Western Europe. The Renaissance has no impact in Asia. It doesn't have an impact in the Middle East, really. And so obviously none in the Americas or Oceania. So is this truly a world history movement or a European history movement?